welcome to another edition of 15 Minutes in the Word. Why? Because 15 minutes, it's enough time to change your life. I'm excited that you've joined. Listen, and I want to thank you in advance for those who will, and thank you for those who already have. You've shared these videos. Many of you all have communicated to me that some of these videos you use as your devotion. And so I just want you to know I'm appreciative that you tune in on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays for 15 minutes in the Word, but then that you share it and that you are getting the word out about what God is doing in your life through the teachings that happen here at Word. For the next 3 nights, I want to talk about something that I think I know will help us, but I also hope would clear up some things. I want to talk for the next 3 nights about what it means to be a growing disciple. What it means to be a growing disciple. You know, interesting enough, when I hear disciple or read about disciple, I often wondered why the Christian church, particularly those of us who are American Christians, often wonder why we lean toward the term Christian instead of the term disciple. Perhaps it's because you can say you're a Christian and believe just about anything. But if you say you're a disciple, then that kind of narrows what you believe down. And so I wanted to, the next 3 nights, come on and share a message to those of us who are disciples and we're growing. These are some things that we must consider. We must we must take on and hold true if we're going to be growing disciples. Now, I started sharing with you that while we don't use the term disciple, and the term disciple literally means pupil. It's a student. I like to say it this way. A disciple is one who is learning how to live like Jesus lived by allowing Jesus to live through them. One who is learning how to live like Jesus lived while, watch this, allowing Jesus to live through them. That's, you know, you're learning because as you're learning, he's living through you. So it's a student, it's a pupil. The root word of disciple is discipline, which means to be a disciple or a follower of Jesus Christ means that it's going to take us to be in a learning posture. Now that's what a disciple is. What I want to share with you is I want to share with you the things that those who are students, those who are learning about Jesus so they can live like Jesus, what they have to embrace to be growing disciples. You say, well, Bishop, what's the difference? What's the difference between learning and growing? Learning, you're gathering the facts. But really growing is when you are applying the facts that you're learning. Now don't let that be confusing. We can look at the disciples that Jesus chose. We can see that they were always learning because Jesus was always teaching. But we also see in their actions, they did not always apply or utilize the things that they were learning. Didn't stop them from learning. But there were moments in their lives and in ours where we are learning, but we're not always applying what we're learning. And what I want to share with you is an episode where Jesus and his disciples are having a conversation, and Jesus says something to his disciples as it relates to what they should expect, what they should embrace if they're going to grow as a disciple. It's found in Matthew chapter 16. Now, let me just give you some context of the book of Matthew. Matthew writes to show us that Jesus is king. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all write about his life. They are the autobiographies of Jesus Christ. But Matthew is writing to show us that Jesus is king. And in him doing that, he exposes to us from his perspective of the life of Jesus, those moments where Jesus had to deal head on with attitudes of grandeur, with attitudes of pride and boastfulness. Listen to what the New Living Translation says. Jesus tells his disciples in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. Listen to what he says. He says, then Jesus said to his disciples, and I'll explain that in just a minute. If any of you want to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. Now, what's interesting enough is throughout this chapter, as Matthew exposes the kingship of Jesus, which is interesting, y'all, because Matthew presents Jesus as a king different than how those who lived among Jesus thought a king should be. Man, I wish I had time to talk about that, because one of the things that we have misinterpreted in the church is that when we talk about we're doing kingdom, the challenge is sometime in our talking like that, we as leaders make ourselves king. But that's a whole nother subject within itself. But he deals with this issue of pride, and he deals with this issue throughout chapter 16 of awareness of who he is and his purpose as it relates to kingship. He starts off dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees who were demanding him to show them a sign, watch this, so that his authority could be proven. And Jesus seemingly displeased and just as if they were working on his nerves, says to them, he says, y'all, I've done signs already. Now, if I ask y'all about astrology, y'all would know how to tell me whether the weather's going to be good or bad. But when it comes down to understanding the things of God, and when it comes down to understanding the signs of the times. Now, he wasn't talking about the end of the world. He's talking about him stepping on the scene. He's not talking eschatology. He's talking about reality. He says, if I ask y'all about the weather, you would know, but you can't interpret the signs of the times. In other words, you don't even know what's going on right in front of you. He deals with that issue. And as he deals with that, he goes on and he then encounters his disciples as he gets to Caesarea Philippi. And while on Caesarea Philippi, he asks them the question, stay with me, I'm going somewhere. I'm talking about growing disciples. He now deals with his disciples as he's dealt with the Pharisees and Sadducees, left them. He gets to Caesarea Philippi and he has a conversation with his boys. And he asks them, he says, what are they saying about me? And everybody starts, well, some say you Jeremiah, some say you Elijah, some say you're one of the prophets. And Peter says, I know who you are. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, he had just told the Pharisees and Sadducees, you have no idea of what's going on. You can't even interpret what's happening. I'm right here. What you're looking for, you're looking at, and you can't even understand that. He tells Peter, after Peter's response, thou art the Son of God, he says to Peter, Peter, don't get beside yourself. Don't get caught up in thinking you're better than the rest of the boys because you came up with the answer, because that was my Father revealing that to you. He shares with them how that they should not tell anybody that he was the Messiah, which was interesting enough because you wondered, didn't you want people to accept you as the Messiah? Why tell the disciples not to tell nobody that you're the Messiah? And here's the answer to that. He wanted them to accept him as Messiah, but the Messiah he was, not the Messiah they expected or they were looking for. See, they were looking for a Messiah to come and overthrow the Roman government. Jesus came as a Messiah who was going to save the world and win the world through love. And so he tells them, don't say anything. He goes on after that and begins to tell them, listen, the kind of Messiah I've come to serve, and I'm going to die. And he begins to explain about his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Peter, who had just said something right, comes now and says something foolish. Boy, I thank God when I read the scriptures, I can see myself. Because like Peter, in one verse, I can be in tune with the Holy Spirit and say the right thing. But then in a few verses later, I can find myself meaning good, but be out of order, all wrong, in tune with the wrong. And Jesus says to Peter's statement, After Jesus explains his debt, Peter says, that ain't going to ever happen. And Jesus said to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. You mind the things of the flesh, not the things of God. Here we have the context. He's straightening out the Pharisees and scribes, telling them, y'all don't even know the sign of the time. You don't even see what's going on in front of you. I am here. He tells his disciples, Peter gave the right answer because my Father told him. He says, and watch this now. Don't y'all go and tell nobody that. Peter, you ain't going to die. Get behind me, Satan. And the very next verse is where he drops to disciples. Remember, a learner, what they're going to have to embrace if they're going to grow. Let me submit this to you. That perhaps you are a child of God, hands down. And perhaps you are a learner. You are a disciple. But maybe you're not seeing the results you want to see in your life. Because there are some things about being a disciple, a stronger disciple, a growing disciple, that you are not willing yet to embrace. I want to share with you, I've given you the context. I want to share with you that it is very possible to be a growing disciple, one who is doing more than just listening, but one who's applying what they're learning as they listen. A growing disciple has to embrace these three things Jesus talks about. And if y'all come back tomorrow night, I promise you, I'm going to take my time and unpack them for you. I love y'all so much. Let somebody know 15 minutes in the Word, it's enough time to change your life. See y'all later.